Uh, Actually, being a state mandate is kind of interesting in a discussion of the Constitution, because the Constitution is basically two different things. It tells the government what they can do, and it tells the government what they can't do. And then the Bill of Rights, 27 of them, some with greater importance than others, really protect the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans. Because all you have to do is watch the television or read the paper this morning, you'll see that most of the world does not enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy, based on a whole variety of reasons, but mainly because of power. People want to maintain power. So when our Constitution was written, there were two basic parties in the United States, not Democrats and Republicans. Actually, there was one party called the Democratic Republican Party. It was all one. And then there were the Federalists. And the Federalists were the guys that were saying the government needs to run everything. You know, George Washington was a Federalist, by the way, but didn't really subscribe to that philosophy. And then the Democrat Republicans were saying, no, the people have the rights and the states have the rights. Now, there's been good and bad from both those arguments, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on in my mandated conversation with you. Constitution, again, the basic document basically tells us how the government can work and what the government can do and what the government can't do. The Bill of Rights is what protects us. The Democrat Republicans and the other anti-federal parties were the ones that said, we need something to be able to say that we can do this and we can do that. Because the Constitution, although the best long-lasting government document that you'll hear about, still had its flaws. I mean, it still didn't recognize the rights of African Americans or Asian Americans or women, for that matter. It was a great document in 1776 or 1789 if you were a white man. But the document was written in a way where it developed over the years to protect all the other groups that we talked about and to give us the rights that we need. We don't want to be told, for example, what religion to follow. I mean, I don't, I'm sure you don't. Or to follow a religion at all. I mean, most of our European forefathers came from, and mothers came from countries that basically restricted religious rights. We don't want to be told that we can't read a paper that's free from government interference. How'd you like to read a paper that Washington approved every day? You know, it wouldn't be a very fair document. Or other things like that, or freedom of speech. You know, I mean, some people think freedom of speech means it's okay if I agree with you, but not if I don't. Well, that's not freedom of speech. When the Nazis wanted to go to Skokie, there were a lot of lawsuits against that, because obviously Skokie, having at the time a very prevalent Jewish American population, many survivors of the Holocaust, they really didn't want to see Nazis coming down Main Street or Dempster Street, whatever the main street is up there. But the courts held that it's freedom of speech. Even if you don't like the speech you're hearing, it's freedom of speech. Luckily, the Nazis never made that march, because I think some of the neighbors said it wouldn't be too safe. But again, it's freedom of speech. We have the right to say what we want, even if it's not popular, even if the government doesn't think it's popular. What is the Constitution to you? Can anyone give me a definition of what you think the Constitution is? Do I have to pick people?
I would say
Here's
the
a good.
Constitution
I knew you would answer that question.
is set the first people who was on the land, like the first people to claim the land. They put together this system that was in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
And they
White male property owners.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, the Moorish Americans had a lot. They had a lot to play in this as well.
The who? I'm
You
sorry.
ever heard of Moorish Americans?
Oh, yeah, sure.
They had a lot to play in this as well, you know, because the land was, from, you know, the history that I studied, the land did belong to the Moorish Americans or the Moroccans, and they made a deal with America to, you know, buy the land out and things like that. So, you know, I'm glad I came, because I want to learn more about the Constitution. But basically, the Constitution was laid basically guidelines for human rights, you know. You're supposed to have
unalienable rights, right? It's a hard word.
Spiritual being having a human experience, but the Constitution like made it natural, because it was a time we was only considered 3/5 of a man,
right?
Like not even a whole man. So,
right.
Yeah.
And you couldn't vote.
Exactly.
That was so your white owner could vote more. Any other definitions that we think about?
Controversial.
You hear the Constitution, you hear the word a lot, right? What would you say?
Controversial.
It's a very controversial document. That's the beauty of it, because it can be so interpreted in so many ways that today, if George Washington and James Madison and those men were here, they'd say, this is not what we wrote. This is a whole different document.
Masons.
But they Freemasons, right? They inadvertently wrote a document that was really expandable based on the changes that would come. They didn't know that there would be waves of immigrants from Europe and Asia coming here. They didn't know that someday, although there were people at the Constitutional Convention that were very much anti-slavery, there were many that were pro-slavery. So they didn't know that in a short time of 80 years there would be no slavery, and that it would take another 100 years to bring equal rights to what it is today. So the Constitution, I think, is definable as really a framework for society, which is basically what you were saying, and it has its adaptions where it can be changed. Cannot be broken, but it can be changed to adapt to the situation at hand, and to accommodate changing social issues and changing social reality.
If you really think about it, it's oriented around the human nature, the way it meanders through everything. Because as a human, you're not always going to see eye to eye.
No, you're not.
And it does, as you said, it does present a very controversial, highly, debatable topic at hand, on the table. So
But it rarely dictates the answer.
precisely.
It rarely dictates the answer. It's usually an answer based on what the Supreme Court at the time thinks.
Exactly, and it's like the courts, they're mere corporations, so they really don't honor the rules in the Constitution. Because like if you look at a lot of things,
Well, they've broken them a few times.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It's like who cares? It's like you got rights within this Constitution, and they violate your rights in court all the time.
Well, especially on local courts,
Yeah.
yes.
The Constitution is like a framework, but it's something that a lot of the people don't understand because they don't take the time to read through it. And if a local court or like a state court can just overrule things that are in the Constitution, that's not really the law of the land.
Well, it is the law of the land. It's often violated. I mean, people
That's what I
violate
mean,
it,
yeah.
but it's the
Like,
law of the land.
If a state, if like a judge or a court can say something totally different from what's written there, then that to me is not, that can't be the law of the land because it's not often being respected. So
But
I
it
think
does have the option of being appealed.
It does.
We have a system where you can go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if you have to.
You can, but I feel like you shouldn't have to if that's what, that's what our fathers or whoever wrote for us.
Well, they were
then that's what
fathers, yeah.
should be respected. I
The-
mean, I'm just saying forefathers.
No, forefathers, you're right.
Yeah. Don't-
My point is there were no foremothers. There were there were no women in the room.
Yeah, I think it's controversial as well.
It is a controversial document, and it is often mistaken, and people have made mistakes. And you will find throughout the history of the democracy that there have been cases that the Supreme Court has said one thing, and then 50 years later, the Supreme Court has said they were wrong. In the early 1900s, the court held that it's okay to have separate but equal schools for African-American kids and other kids. But in 1954, with Brown versus the Board of Education, the court said it's ultimately unfair to do that because that school in that part of town is not getting the resources that school in that part of town is getting. But if that school was integrated and that school was integrated and they got the same amount of benefits, then everybody's being treated equal. If you have a school over there just for Latino kids, and you have a school over there just for black kids, and you have a school over there for everybody else, and the school in the white neighborhood is getting 3 times the amount of money that the school in the black neighborhood is getting, that's not equal under any definition.
It's like another example.
But my point is, let me just finish this. My point is that the court itself has corrected itself over the years. And that's the beauty of the Constitution. Under civil codes, like in Europe and many European countries, they would have to actually vote on that, Their parliament or their Congress, whatever, would have to vote for changes. In our system, because it's a three-branch system, we have checks and balances. If Congress said tomorrow, you know what, it's okay for women to not be able to vote anymore, and we're passing a law that way, besides the revolution that would come from it, the courts can come back and say, no, the Constitution says that women have the right to vote. Interestingly, one of the most controversial amendments throughout history has been the Equal Rights Amendment. It was first introduced in 1923. Okay, that's a few years ago, and did not get the number of votes needed to become part of the Constitution. The argument being the anti-ERA people saying it's already in the Constitution. If the 14th Amendment says equal protection, that includes women. Where the pro-ERA people would say, we want it defined, we want it to say women have equal rights to men.